Hello, government students. This is Mrs. Politsky, and I have your notes for Chapter 1, Section 3, The Role of Government in Economic Systems. And so we're going to talk a little bit about capitalism, socialism, and communism. And as we go along, you're going to need to fill in your chart here. And we're going to talk about ownership of property. In capitalism, this is a privatized kind of thing, meaning that an individual who wants to buy something can buy. In socialism, you have a little bit of private ownership, but you also have something called public ownership, which is like the government owns certain entities or properties. In communism, it's all publicly owned, meaning that the government and the people own everything. As far as the principle of operation, in capitalism, it's always a free enterprise, meaning that if you're willing to take a risk as an entrepreneur and you are paying attention to the demands of the consumers and you're willing to supply certain items to them, then you can participate in the game. In socialism, there's equal distribution of wealth, meaning that everybody has a fair share of the profits, and the government is always going to try to make sure that the handling and distribution of goods and those people who are out there trying to sell are always trying to do things in a fair way. When we talk about communism, it's always centrally controlled, and this means that it is controlled by the government. Uh, Sometimes we use the term command economy when we talk about communism. As far as choice of work, in capitalism, it's open. Anything that you can possibly do to earn money is obviously fair game. And as far as occupation choices, you have a lot of different choices. In socialism, it's regulated just as it is in communism. And the reason why is that there's concern that maybe certain occupations might have too many people in them, and they want to make sure that they have just the right amount. Okay, and this may mean helping people make career decisions at a very young age, in some cases as young as grade school. And if a person maybe scores low on a certain qualification test, as a grade school student, they may be destined to a life of working in a certain industry or factory. And if they score high, they might have an opportunity to have a little more prestige as far as their career choices. As far as wages, in capitalism, it's all about the market. The market is going to determine how much people are going to be paid. So if an individual has a certain skill or talent that is really highly in demand, then the wages are going to be high, especially if there isn't a lot of other people that are working in that industry. When you talk about socialism and also in communism, these are also regulated. So the government sets the wage. And so you may have like an occupation here in our nation, like medicine, for example, being a medical doctor, which typically earns a very good salary. But in a country that's socialistic or communistic as far as their economic principles, they may only get a certain wage, and it may be very similar to other occupations. As far as profits, profits are unlimited. So there's a lot of incentive to go out there and do something unique and try to find out what it is that the people want. Great opportunities to make a lot of money. In socialism, workers and managers share. So if you have a manager who's really, really smart and they know how to motivate their workers, if they make money, so do their workers. They kind of split the pot, so to speak. In communism, it's all about shared equity, meaning that everybody kind of gets the same amount, regardless of how productive or how much quality they put into their job. It's all kind of the same. The government's role in capitalism, it ensures basically free enterprise. When you talk about socialism, it's to ensure equal access to goods and services. In communism, it's all about controlling the wallet, the money, and the government is going to kind of decide how the money is going to be spent. Government involvement in capitalism is always regulatory, making sure that there's a certain level of safety, that the quality of certain goods and services meet a certain level of, I guess you could say, quality. Socialism Government owns the land and industries, and they provide things like social services, such as like healthcare. In communism, there is still government ownership of land and industry, but the government also plans production. They tell people, certain industries, like how much they're going to produce that next year. They also handle the distribution of the goods back to the citizens. And so it may be a situation where an individual may not be able to buy or purchase something that they want until it's their turn. Amount of competition, it's great. As long as you can compete, you can be in the game. In socialism, it's limited. There are some choices, but not necessarily as many as you would have in a capitalistic system. In communism, there is no competition. The government produces this, and that's what you get. So if you wanted to go buy a car, you get what the government produces. It may be one brand, one model, and that's it. As far as production decisions in capitalism, it all goes back to those people who are investing. So if you are a stockholder, you can have a say over that industry. Buyers and sellers in the marketplace, they help make production decisions by how they spend their money on certain products. In socialism, there are central planners, people who are supposedly the experts that can determine how much should be produced and when it should be produced. And in communism, it's all about the government saying when and where and how. So these are some of the different characteristics of the different economic systems. And I'll say this, in the United States, we're not exactly a pure capitalistic system. There are some areas that you will see some things that are a wee bit socialized. So for example, when you talk about our utilities, for example, in Nebraska, that is actually owned by the people. It is publicly regulated and operated. But as far as like a lot of our other businesses, it's for the most part pretty capitalistic. All right, economic events. This is the bottom of your page here. In number one, Adam Smith writes The Wealth of Nations, and that happened in 1776, which was a huge influence on our founding fathers, by the way. In number two, communist China begins allowing limited capitalism. That happened in the latter part of the 20th century. In number three, Karl Marx writes Das Kapital, an in-depth analysis of how capitalism works and why he believed it ultimately will fail as an economic system. That was written in 1867. And number four, the United States increases its regulation of the economy, and that happened in the early part of the 20th century. If you remember back to American history, a lot of your progressives, guys who were trust busters like Theodore Roosevelt and William Howard Taft and Woodrow Wilson, these are the people who brought in a lot of these new regulations for government. And number five, modern socialism begins. This is letter B, the 19th century. And finally, in number six, we have letter A. Karl Marx foresees a communist revolution against capitalism, resulting in a one-class society. This is back in 1848, and we're still waiting for that. So thank you very much.